Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and in today's video I am going to be sharing with you my brutally honest thoughts about the Marineland PRO series hang-on back filters. This is gigantic. It looks even larger on the screen. I just pulled this off of an aquarium. It's been on that aquarium for years, or at least a couple years, and you can see it's a bit of a mess, but this is a real life review. We've got a number of these in the fish room, have been using them since they came out a few years ago, and so I wanted to share with you some, I guess, the good and the bad about the Marineland PRO series in general. They make them in all different sizes, all the way from, I believe, the Marineland PRO 125 all the way up to the Marineland Emperor 450 Pro. So there's a lot of variety in there, pretty much a filter size for most standard size fish tanks. Let's talk about what makes them good, but also some things that could be improved across the line. Hope you enjoy the video. Appreciate you being here. So like I mentioned, the Marineland PRO series was brought on the market sometime around 2020 or so, and it was an improvement over the old Marineland Penguins for a number of reasons, which I'm going to talk about, but there are some things with this filter that you should definitely consider when you're making your choices. Now, with the Marineland PRO series, the other major competitors are going to be your Seachem tidal lines and your Aquaclears. I think those are the two main competitors. And so I've done an entire series on the Seachem filters, on the Marineland filters. I'm going to put those down in the description below so you can make a better comparison and a better decision. Today, our focus is here on the Marineland PRO series filters. Now, first thing, when they brought these filters out, there were a couple of major improvements to the old filters and really just filtration in general. And that is this little guy here, this motor, this housing actually rests inside the aquarium. And so with these motors being inside the aquarium, an internal motor, what happens is there's no more need to fill up the back of the hang-on back filter to get this thing started and to create suction. It is what is known as self-priming. That was a huge, huge step forward for the Marineland series, is having these filters be self-priming. In other words, you just set them in the tank, and this thing, because it's in the water, sucks the water into the back of the filter, and everything works out pretty well. That's really important if you have something like a power outage, or maybe something happens where you lose suction temporarily. This thing will filter the water back in, suck the water back in. Huge. The other thing that it does, and what we have found over the course of the few years that we've been using them now, is this is a very, very quiet filter because the motor is actually in the water. You don't hear all that typical gurgling and grinding noise that some filters may make if the motor is sitting outside the water on the other side of the filter. So that was a really big improvement. The other thing that was huge is, let me go ahead and just take this lid off. Again, it's going to be dirty. Oop, one of the bio wheels fell off. Let me put that back in there so you get a more realistic look at what this thing, a realistic view of what this thing normally looks like. There we go, bio wheels back in. The other huge thing was that this is a fully adjustable flow, and you can really adjust the flow on these Marineland filters. And that is really big because you can get a slightly oversized filter for your tank, turn down the flow if you want to, and then still have that filter if you should ever upgrade. Now, for the most part, for our fish room, we've got these on fairly large tanks, or they're really heavily stocked, so they're just running at full flow. But if you want to turn it down, some of the best water flow control on the market, I would say, kind of similar to the Seachem tidal line, where you can really get a lot of change in the water flow. If you're comparing this to maybe an Aquaclear, that little knob that's on the top of those filters, the water flow adjustment isn't nearly as good. Now, pricing these filters, I'm going to compare them to the Seachem tidal line and the Aquaclears. Like I said, I think those are the two main competitors. By the way, if you're looking for the Marineland PRO or the Seachem titles, there are Amazon affiliate links down in the description below. You click on those, it takes you right to the filter. Now, price-wise, I would say that these are typically going to be a little bit less expensive than the Seachem tidal line. They're usually going to be on par with the Aquaclears, maybe slightly less, but for the most part, across the lineup, they're going to be very similar. So in terms of price, your Seachem titles are typically going to be a little bit more expensive. The Aquaclears and the Marineland PROs are going to be about equal, at least they are at the time of this video, and they're going to have a slightly less than the Seachem tidal line. Okay, so price-wise, they are certainly competitive. They have been reliable. We've had a number of them in our fish room. We had only one go down on us and just have to go right in the trash. I'll talk about why that is in a moment. But for the most part, like our old Marineland Penguin filters that have been up and running for 15, almost 20 years or so, these guys have been very, very reliable so far. Now, like I said, love the internal motor because of the self-priming feature and because of the quietness. But there are some things to consider. And so if I were magically in charge of the Marineland lineup, and Marineland, if you're watching, there are some definite things we could maybe alter or change that would make this filter even better. So I think the first thing has to do with the motor that I really like so much, and that is this motor is pretty thick. And I know it's hard to see because I'm, in my infinite wisdom, I'm wearing a black shirt and trying to show you a filter that is also black. But let me go ahead and hold that up a little bit more. And so this motor here, you can see it's somewhat thick, and the way, now I'm going to have a hard time getting this all back in. Probably shouldn't have done that on camera. But anyway, let me go ahead and fit this back in. It just twists in like that. But this is a very thick motor, and unfortunately, because it sits where it does when it's in the tank, sometimes some of the glass lids don't rest completely flush at the front of your tank, because if this thing's sitting here and you got your glass lids, they're kind of sticking out the front, they might lean a little bit on the actual frame of the tank itself. Now for me, that doesn't really matter. It's probably 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. It doesn't fit completely flush. If you have a canopy on your tank, it's really not going to matter. But for some people that bothers them. And so it's just because this motor is sitting where it's at, and it's a little bit thick. And so sometimes that can be a problem. Again, for me, not really. For other people, maybe it will be. The other thing to consider is I mentioned that one of our filters went down. That is because when we were doing a water change, one of our boys was doing a water change, they forgot to unplug the filter. And that's a big no-no regardless of the type of filter that you have, but especially for these, because they often will still remain and still have suction even if the water level is quite low. Now, if they lose suction and this motor continues to run, what will inevitably happen, and can happen very quickly in these filters, is this motor gets extremely hot. And when it does, it actually deforms the plastic and the housing inside. And once that happens, the impeller can no longer spin, and that motor is absolutely done. There's nothing you can do about it. So if you choose these filters, make sure when you're doing water changes, you have to turn them off, because if this motor gets hot and this housing gets deformed, you've got the filter's garbage at that point. The other thing I wish was a little bit different about these filters is you can take this part off to reach the impeller to do some of the maintenance. The problem is once you do that, this thing just snapping it back on is a little bit more problematic than I would like it to be. I mean, it does go back on, but you can see here, it's not fun to do. Usually you have to take this motor off. And again, I wish I wouldn't have done that on camera, because usually I have to set this thing down, take the motor off to get it back on. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of leave this off. Usually it snaps in one side, but getting the other side on is a little bit difficult. The next thing, and I think this is the biggest problem with the Marineland Pro series, and it has been the biggest problem ever since they invented these filters. If you were to go on Amazon, for the most part, these get fairly decent reviews, except for one glaring problem, and that is these bio wheels. These bio wheels often stop spinning, and they often stop spinning fairly early into this filter's life. The problem is, one, I truly believe these bio wheels are almost, I wouldn't say completely useless, but they are mostly useless, and they're I guess okay for marketing on a box, but in practicality, they don't serve much of a purpose, and it's a source, if you're going to use it for marketing, it's a source of constant headache for the user. And if there are bad reviews, it's usually, all these things don't spin. And let me tell you right now, it is absolutely does not make a difference. And here's why. I have a master's cert in aquaculture and fish health, so I have a little bit of background in this. This kind of a structure is really great when you've got really heavily stocked, like let's say aquaculture type situations or fish farming situations where you've got these big giant filtration systems that are moving water over the individual fins here, or the blades. And what that does is it provides a lot of oxygen, a lot of surface area for beneficial bacteria. Now that's great if you're in an aquaculture situation, but in a standard fish tank, even one that's heavily stocked, these things just don't provide the surface area for bacteria relative to the problems they cause. There is so much area back here. There's so much space to put filtration, whether it is fine sponge or coarse sponge, plus your filter floss, plus the biomedia, which we actually never use, that you're not going to need these things to store beneficial bacteria. It's just not necessary. And so what I wish is that Marineland would just get rid of these things. I think for the most part in the aquarium industry, it's more of a gimmick than anything else. And they would save themselves so many negative issues in terms of people complaining that the filter is not working when it is. It's just these things stop spinning. So most likely if you have this filter, it's probably going to stop spinning for you. I'm here to tell you it really absolutely positively doesn't matter at all. The other thing that I would do with this filter, and it's a minor thing, but you see the intake here and you see the intake guard. And in some ways that's really good because if you've got snails or shrimp, adult shrimp at least, they're not going to get sucked up through here. When that's a good thing. They also sell this where you can put an intake sponge over it. Also nice. But I do wish that these holes here for the intake were a little bit wider and that this thing was a little bit thicker in terms of just its build quality. And the reason for that is if you have a tank that, let's say, has duckweed or hornwort or anything where there's some detritus, this thing actually gets clogged quite a bit. And so what we find ourselves having to do is take just like a plastic brush and kind of brush this thing out or pull this out of the aquarium and then have to kind of hose this down in the sink just because this clogs a little bit faster than a lot of the other intakes on a lot of other filters. So again, it's a minor thing. And if you're using an intake sponge, it's probably not going to matter. But if you're just using this by itself, it's going to be, and I'll try to get it in the light here so you can see, very, very narrow opening. So I wish these were a little bit wider. Obviously, there's a trade-off. You run the risk of maybe snails, especially like mystery snails, getting their bodies caught up in here. Maybe they suck up smaller invertebrates and stuff, but I'm willing to trade that and put an intake sponge on there if I'm worried about it, rather than have this clogging up a little bit more than I would like. So overall, the Marineland Pro series, I believe, is a vast improvement over the older versions of the Penguin filters because of that internal filter, because it's self-priming, because it is very quiet, and they have been reliable other than that one issue I mentioned before. Again, if you're looking for a hang-on back filter, check out the affiliate links down in the description below. I would, if you haven't investigated the Seachem title line, I have a series, a filter video I did just like this, looking at the good and the bad of the Seachem title line as well, so you can make an informed decision. Would love to hear from you down in the comments section below. If you've used the Marineland Pro series, is there anything that I missed, good or bad? Really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you in the next one.